Natalie is a community organizer with Regeneracion in Watsonville in the Pajaro Valley, and it's a group that is fighting for climate justice. Natalie was born and raised in California and was exposed to extreme outcomes of environmental degradation when she was growing up, and that is what drove her to pursue a career in environmental justice. And she believes that policing reform is actually very closely tied to environmental justice. In fact, right after this event, Regeneracion will be hosting a webinar to talk about just that. So Natalie has very kindly agreed to give us an overview of the much larger conversation they'll be having at 7 o'clock. And if you want to participate in that event after this one, I will drop a link to that event in the chat so you can jump in there. Natalie?
Thank you so much. And thank you, Kat. I'm so honored to hear you speak. I'm like still shaking for how moved I am. So thank you all for having me here. I'm so honored to be among all of these speakers and in this space. I'm the community organizer with Regeneracion, a climate action organization. And when most people think of climate and the environment, they think of melting polar ice caps and saving the rainforest or recycling. But I think of people. I grew up in the Central Valley, where we consistently ranked highest for the most polluted air in the nation because of emissions caused by oil and gas extraction and industrial agriculture. Growing up, my siblings and I all had respiratory issues. So when I think of environmental justice, I think about my family and my communities. I think of Watsonville, where our predominantly Latinx population are already on the front lines of climate impacts. Our 2018 community survey found that 74% of agricultural workers, their families or neighbors experience extreme heat conditions in their workplace. So when we take a step back and ask, how did this happen? How are so many communities, particularly communities of color, experiencing these unjust realities? The answer is racism and centuries of oppression and exploitation. Climate change is not the problem in itself. It is the symptom of this much larger issue. It is the result of our unjust history. It's fueled not by mystical greenhouse gases that appeared in our atmosphere, but by unjust and racialized systems, which allowed white people to fuel environmental degradation at the expense of Black and brown lives. Researchers have found that air pollution is disproportionately caused by white Americans' consumptions of goods and services, but disproportionately inhaled by Black and Hispanic Americans. Hop Hopkins from the Sierra Club said, "You can't have climate change without sacrifice zones, and you can't have sacrifice zones without disposable people, and you can't have disposable people without racism." And I think that really encapsulates the roots of climate change. The reality is that we'll never stop or completely address climate change and its impacts without ending racism. And the struggle for racial justice is a critical component of the struggle for climate justice. Racism and all forms of oppression must be eliminated for the dignity and human rights of us all, and so that we can unite to avert the climate crisis. And so in this past year, we've seen more and more environmental organizations waking up to this reality. We've been asked to speak to many audiences about what environmental racism looks like and how we can dismantle it, but there's so much more work to be done. Until our communities realize just how deeply racism is woven into the fabric of our societies, we can't begin to properly address solutions. Equity and racial justice is not just a checklist of actions. It is a deep commitment to the process of unlearning centuries of racist colonial beliefs and working to dismantle them. A little over a year ago, myself and a group of volunteers formed our advocacy committee. We began to organize on how we can best advocate for climate justice. The Black Lives Matter movement and George Floyd's death galvanized our committee to focus on the issue of police violence and to take a serious look at how our cities are spending our money to support our communities. And so we worked to analyze Watsonville's budget and inform the community on what our city spending looks like, and advocated for more transparent and democratic processes going forward. And what we found paralleled the rest of the nation. In 2017, the United States spent $115 billion on policing. That same year, it spent only $8 billion on the Environmental Protection Agency and $7 billion on the Federal Emergency Management Agency. In Watsonville, over 40% of our general fund goes to policing. Meanwhile, departments like Public Works, Parks and Community Services, and Community Development are each at 10% or below of the general fund. Money for policing is money that's not funding climate adaptation and mitigation or the real root causes of our societal issues. Climate impacts such as droughts, extreme weather events, and increased wildfires worsen every year, and we need to ensure that our communities can effectively respond to these threats. So we're seeing that not only have Black and Brown communities done the least to cause climate change and are already suffering the worst impacts, but also that we have the least amount of resources to deal with these harmful impacts. At the end of the day, adapting to the risk of climate change means giving people the chance to be safe in the face and aftermath of storms, fires, and extreme weather, and that is not the role of our police departments. Our own chief of police has echoed the sentiment that the police are not the best people to respond to nonviolent calls, and that we do indeed spend too much money on policing, but claim that there are no real alternatives. But the reality is that there are other options, but it's going to take a lot of organizing and actions and willingness to think beyond the way we've always done things. So our committee is hosting an event this evening at 7 p.m. titled Reimagining Public Safety, Alternatives to Police for Nonviolent Crisis Calls, to hold a space to continue this thinking and learning. Our goals are to reimagine public safety as more than police oriented, to share information about a proven successful and cost-effective model, and to ignite deeper conversations about ways to make our public budget work for everyone. There will be an overview of South County's Mobile Emergency Service for Youth, a program which provides community and field-based crisis intervention services to youth ages 21 and younger and their families, as well as a detailed presentation about CAHOOTS, Crisis Assistance Helping Out in the Streets, a program widely recognized as a model for community-based mobile support. The presentation will be followed by a question and answering session. We may not have all the answers, but we can continue to learn and teach those around us and keep having these conversations until we find them. And so we hope you'll join us tonight to continue this conversation. And I wanted to share our vision at Regeneracion is a community that has achieved climate justice, so all people in the Pájaro Valley can live in harmony with the natural world. And to reach this, we need to think holistically and understand the connections between these issues. We must ensure our local government is investing in health, equity, and justice. And so last, to support us or join our work, you can contact us on social media, email me, and we hope that you all can continue to back the leadership of young people of color like myself in our area. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Natalie. And I just want to let everyone know that Natalie is our youngest panelist today at just 24, but she is incredibly impressive. Thank you for joining us. And I've shared a link in the chat if anyone in the audience is interested in continuing the growth and the discussion.